everyone. Welcome to another edition of Rice is Life. We know that you are very attuned to this program. You know exactly how this program has made the impact around the country and around the Caribbean as far as I'm concerned. And today, we're going to have a great show. We're going to bring to you some information that we have promised you the last time that we had this program, and we told you that we're going to be dealing with the Petro-Caribe deal. On the panel tonight, we have on my right Mr. Clive, former Minister of Finance and an executive member of the APNU, point man on finance. We have also next to him is Dr. Durga, the owner and manager of Guyana Rice. You know that this man has been in the news. He has been giving all the information pertaining to what the state of rice in Guyana. And of course, we have a guru, if you want to call him that, on economy, an economist in his own right, Professor Clive Thomas. And of course, next to me, Mr. Mohammed, who will be co-chairing this program with us tonight, today on this special occasion. We trust that you would call a friend, tell them that Rice is Life is on the air. And this special concern about the Petro-Caribe deal, the truth about the Petro-Caribe deal, will be discussed in its entirety. Mohammed?
Andrew, before we get into the program, I wanted to give a little background for those viewers who haven't had an understanding, because last time we spoke a little bit about the Petro-Caribe Fund.
Correct.
This fund was initiated 10 years ago. The Venezuelans, through the president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who died last year, I think, had initiated this Petro-Caribe Fund, not only to Guyana, but the whole of the Caribbean, English-speaking and French-speaking, Dutch-speaking Caribbean. And the idea was to be able to help the underdeveloped countries in the Caribbean and other parts of the world to benefit from the huge source of fuel in Venezuela. But what has happened is that this fund was extended in 2010 to what we call the Rights for Fuel Fund. It's a kind of bartering system. We have here some of the experts on rice and finance and economics.
Yes.
And I think we will not delay you by introducing, first of all, Professor Thomas, who is very versed in this whole area of Petro-Caribe.
So, Professor, the news out there in the media, the government has painted a picture that this Petro-Caribe deal is good for Guyana. It's going to develop Guyana. It's going to ensure that the rice industry and the fuel industry, become viable. Could you carry us through, if you may, sir? Give us a backing in terms of the purpose of this deal. Rahaman mentioned a little bit about it just now, but give us about your expertise in this area. Tell the viewing public exactly the true nature of the Petro-Caribe deal and what has gone wrong.
Okay, as Mr. Hammond mentioned, the deal started out in 2005. I've characterized it as a deal which represents the old-time saying, the way to hell is paved with good intentions, because it started out as a very idealist deal, but it wasn't properly designed, it was not properly organized. As a result, a number of problems have appeared.
Like?
But there are so many. First of all, the deal was not negotiated by the Caribbean CARICOM as a group. So individual countries joined when and as it suited them. And that resulted in a deal as far as CARICOM countries are concerned, and indeed for the rest of the Caribbean, including Cuba, an arrangement among heads of state, a political arrangement. So it was dogged by politics from the very beginning. And the politics that it was dogged with is the politics of the leading or ruling parties of the time in government. So for example, in Ghana, the deal does not encompass legitimately the opposition, the civil society, the private sector, the workers and the rice and the farmers to participate in the arrangement. It is something run exclusively by government. And secondly, because of that, and because of the attitude, I think, towards the way in which governments tend to be secretive, all the dealings are secretive. It has not given any transparency to the public. So what has happened is we don't know, for example, in detail how much oil Guyana buys, how much oil, what we pay for it. These prices are not published on a regular and real-time basis. You might find out what happened in 2011 and 2012, as the documentary showed me says, but we won't know what happened in 2013 or 14. We might find out for 15 in 2020. But what has become very clear is that the deal was a deal which would work in the context of high oil prices, because the Caribbean countries would like some relief from high prices. But now that the prices are falling, Venezuela finds it impossible to sustain the agreement. It is trying its best to keep it going, but I think that that will not last too long. Already it's trying to sell by discount some of the debt that the rest of the Caribbean has accumulated in relation to the deal, to private in funds, investment funds in the United States. But maybe I should explain how the deal works. Well, it's not a deal that provides finances to the government. What it provides is credit. So you buy the oil, you don't pay all of it up front. You get a credit, and out of that credit, you're allowed to use the funds for what they say development purposes. And that's where the racketeering and all the misuse of the resources generated by this deal takes place. It would not matter so much if the deal was insignificant. But as you know, we have import a large part of our GDP, total output of goods and services, in the form of oil. And the oil imports from Caribe has averaged between 25 and 50% for the rest, for the entire Caribbean and also for Guyana. So the amount of money we're talking about is significant.
Trillions of dollars.
Trillions of Guyana dollars.
Trillions of dollars.
But I would say 10% of our present GDP, if we call it, let's say $3 billion, would be about 30 billion. So a lot of money is really involved in this deal. And when we get a credit for it, and we're allowed to use the credit to finance certain programs that we would agree with the Venezuelans. The other complication is that Venezuela has not set a standard arrangement for these credit arrangements across the region. Each country is allowed to make a bilateral negotiation with Venezuela and arrive at their own special arrangement. But in our case, we opted to get rice as a part payment for some of the debt, and that's how it got extended to us in that way. Not every country would have an exchange like that where they facilitate the export of a product as part payment, the domestic product as a part payment for the deal.
Before we go to Dr. Drogan to talk about the bartering the rice, because he was involved deeply with myself in trying to get the contract with Venezuela. Could you remind our viewers about the 60 to 40%, where the government has to pay 60% upfront, and the 40%
Well, it varies with the price of oil.
They pay for 25% or 1% interest.
It's not a fixed ratio. When the price of oil is very high, the credit arrangement is very substantial. But as the price of oil falls, we don't need the credit, because actually we need credit to buy oil when the price is high. So the price of oil falls, the amount of credit you get is reduced.
So you're saying it doesn't matter what happens in terms of if it falls or
No,
raises?
it matters what happens in the sense that the higher the price for oil, the more we need credit to be able to buy it. If it's $140, we might get, say, 30% credit. If it's $50, we might not get any credit, as in fact is the case once it falls too low. So to us, the value of the deal rises with the price of oil. But in Venezuela, the capacity to work the deal is reduced when the price of oil falls. So the basic asymmetry in the arrangement, and it was not well designed. That's why I said the way to hell is paved with good intentions. Chavez wanted to help us.
Yes.
But in designing it that way, he set it free in a lot of contradictions that would manifest itself in the downfall.
I want to ask you one question before we go to Dr. Durgan and finance man, Mr. Carl. Was this deal really necessary? Did Guyana really have to take that deal?
Well, it was such a good deal that I don't think any country refused it.
Remember,
That's why I'm saying the way to hell is paved with good intentions.
it's 40%.
Maybe Chavez wanted political influence. That's what everybody is saying right now, including President Obama, only today in
Yes.
Panama, and that's why they're offering this new energy deal for the rest of the Caribbean.
Correct.
But if you take Chavez as his word, and he genuinely wanted to develop some solidarity and to help the poorer countries of the Caribbean, and pursue the Bolivarian vision of a true development, which I did in my writing on it, I don't want to question his motive. It still objectively ended up by not being what Bolivar would have wanted, an arrangement to sustain the efforts and the benefits for the peoples of the region. It ended up being a club for the politicians at the top, and they've abused it throughout the Caribbean. Although we have a lot of racketeering, and of course, which you can talk about later, in the financing and the use of the funds. And some of it you have to speculate because we don't even know. But in the rest of the Caribbean, the same problems exist. I noticed that in yesterday's papers, I think today, there was some arrangement whereby in St. Vincent, they were able to get a bulk storage for oil facility, and there's a lot of praise and talk about it. But within St. Vincent, there's a lot of controversy generated over that. The countries have used this money not only for development like that, but sometimes for aiding this ruling party in some of its arrangements, pet political projects. They use the money that they get out of that for that purpose. It's characteristic of what we do here in Ghana.
Correct.
Before we go to Brother Carl, Dr. Durga, could you talk a little bit about the rice, because you were engaged in that initially?
Well, the Petro-Caribe deal for Guyana is a good thing business-wise for Guyana and for the rice farmers. For one simple reason is that it can be a guaranteed market, because Venezuela for the coming years will not be able to sustain itself in planting enough rice for their population. So, having said that, Guyana has a very good negotiation position with Venezuela, because they need the rice and they have oil in excess.
The fair exchange.
So there is a fair exchange, and that makes it for Guyana and now also for Suriname a very good thing. Unfortunately, exactly how Professor Thomas has said, is that politics came in the way. Let me give you a few examples here in Guyana. They barter now also Venezuelan fertilizer for oil. But that fertilizer now comes and is controlled by a PPP cabal. That is Mr. Siraj, Mr. Ramsamy, Jagnarain, all the guys who have for decades hijacked the RP.
Some of the millers also.
The millers are involved because they get the fertilizer, some of them on credit, and then they tell the farmers, okay, if you want fertilizer, you understand, you have to the X, Y, and Z. And these days, I've seen it in Essequibo, I've seen it in West Dem. They point blank tell the farmers, well, when AP and you and AFC have meeting, we're watching you. If you're there, don't think you're going to get fertilizer. You understand? So here is it, where Chavez has, this thing was meant to help farmers and help people. It's now being used as a political tool. The other shameful situation is that, and I have published it, and obviously they cannot come with an answer because it's the truth. When you look at the freight, because this is the most obvious one, because those numbers are staggering. You understand? These guys put brokers in between. And whereas the freight rate is between $28 and $35, they're charging $68. So that money, you're talking 30 million United States dollars on the freight made. I don't know how much.
How much is in
Guyana
Guyana
is.
dollars?
I don't know. Maybe Carl can tell
Very
us.
tunes.
Billion.
30 million.
30 million US
6
dollars.
billion.
Yeah,
6 billion Guyana
6
dollars.
billion
Guyana
Guyana
dollars.
dollars.
That's the
Right.
freight alone.
That's what the boys made on the freight. And
the
I'm not
freight.
talking on the freight alone. You understand? I'm not talking about the social fund, which I was told, because no, it's what Professor Thomas says, that nobody, there's secrecy about it. And that social fund, if we exported, say, average 1 million tons already, and that social fund was charging $20 per ton, they reduced it now to 9. So in that social fund, you have another, say, 6 billion, or no, $3 billion. Then GRDB charges, I think, $9 per ton, US dollars per ton. So they have a couple billion there too. What they're doing with the money, we don't know. But what I do know is that, and that is what worries me, that these same people who talk about the Money Laundering Act are telling people here, because people apparently don't know, that Marriott will be financed by 2 Chinese, so it was those runaway, because in China they hang them if they
And they're
corrupt.
looking for them.
And they're looking for them now, so those beat out, you understand? But I sincerely believe they were fronting for some of the PPP boys there. When you tell me that there's 2 offshore companies from the British Virgin Island coming to invest here in Marriott, let me tell you, British Virgin Island is a tax haven. That money is either stolen money, it's money which they don't pay taxes, or it is drugs money. Otherwise, it does not come from the British Virgin Island. British Virgin Island is a piece of rock in the Caribbean Sea, has nothing except offshore banking. And so these are the guys who are peddling everywhere that oh, we want the Money Laundering Act, and the opposition this and the other and so forth. They don't want it. It's nonsense. And that is why I'm so happy that the opposition stood steadfast and said, you either assent to what has to be controlled here before we assent to the other, because they wanted to be off the hook internationally, so they could continue their mischief. So that anti-money laundering thing is a farce. It's not true. And I'm saying this because yesterday I was appalled, because in a meeting which was televised, where taxpayers apparently are paying that as well, I heard the president saying that. Another thing the president said yesterday, which was very appalling to me, because I know the
You
inside.
mean the
of it.
meeting at the village, Alexander village?
Alexander Village, yes.
Because
He-
I saw
he-
that television.
Yeah, he said there that this Suriname guy won a case for this disposable bottles and so forth. So it's $5 million US, which the government now has to pay because the opposition didn't want it to pass this law to adjust it and so forth. I have never heard so much crap
Very
You
careful.
mean lies?
in lies in one sentence,
Well,
because
explain.
the person the president is talking about, he forgot that on national television and on the radio, there was some function at the culture center. He was introduced while he was arriving, that him and this gentleman,
Mr. Anami.
the Suriname guy, I don't want to call the guy his name, but everybody knows who it is, entered there, and he was introduced as the dear friend of the president. This is the same guy who sued. So what happened there, because I looked at the case, there was no proper
Arrangement.
no proper case presented.
But
So
no- main
basically,
defense.
they helped the guy get the judgment.
No proper defense. You
No proper
you mean
defense.
your friend
Yeah.
Anil allowed to appear.
And don't forget what the office of the president is paying in lawyers' fees. So here's the president telling in Alexander Finis about this Surinamese, where they have to pay so much money now, and it's the opposition fault. How is it the opposition fault? It's your friend.
It's
So
their
most
friend.
probably there's some crooked arrangement there where they're gonna get a cut
Yeah.
or so. And God forgive me if it's not right. But what else should I think? What else should I think?
Mr.
You
Greenidge,
understand?
with this seemingly corrupt practices and so on, and your experience as former finance minister in previous governments, the NISIL fund, and the fact that we don't know anything about the Caribe fund, the 40% that is supposed to be paid after 25 years at 1% interest. How would you relate those two things, in your experience?
Well, perhaps I can, if you allow me, I'd just like to recap a part so that we're clear as to what we're saying.
Okay.
I think that it needs to be emphasized that the idea behind the fund and the assistance that's being provided is a good idea, and I agree with CY in that sense. I believe that as Guyanese and as Caribbean people, we have to be other than naive. In other words, we have to understand that whether it's the United States, China, or Germany, or Venezuela, renders this type of development assistance, in most cases, they have a development focus in mind, in which if you develop, of course, they can get credit, you do better, and they're good partners, but they also have political motives. Clearly, there's an important political motive on the Venezuela side that we always have to bear in mind, because that is intended, I think, largely to try and ensure that we are less militant in defense of our own borders. I think that has to be, that has
clearly,
to be clear.
yes.
So that is one. But let's not focus on that, because we're looking at the economic side at the moment. What is being said here is Venezuela is prepared and has been prepared under Chavez to provide to the region, including Guyana, oil, one at a concessionary prices or prices we negotiate with them, and more importantly, to allow us
Just to make a
to allow.
slight correction.
But
They can't sell it at a lower price because that's prohibited by OPEC.
no, it's concession in the sense that
The credit.
when you yes,
Yeah,
exactly,
so that was the
exactly.
one.
That is
Yeah.
that is what I was in the process of
Just to be
explaining.
clear for the
That the arrangement allows you to pay them later. I mean, you don't have to pay cash on the nail, as the English would say.
Later.
So you get the petroleum now, you pay later. We have an arrangement which, as we done in the 1980s when we were in financial difficulties, also sought to have an arrangement that allows us to pay by way of supplying a commodity that we could supply.
Good.
And the arrangement that is being referred to here is that arrangement. Now, the specific terms of the arrangement, there may be in cases, or there may be a case for arguing that the formula, as CY was explaining, could have been a better formula. That is one side, and for that reason, in the future, one would want to look again at the arrangement as to the extent to which the shipment of rice, in terms of timing and quantity, can be modified. But you know, I believe that the bigger problem is not so much that one, although that is part of the problem, clearly. The bigger problem has to do with how the governments themselves organize the arrangements and take advantage, if you like, of the resources that are released, made available by the arrangement. And what Dr. Grover is pointing to here specifically, I think is at least this is the area I tend to want to focus on. If you're getting a price, let us in order to be simple, you're getting a price for the rice. Forget the price at which you're paying for the petroleum, because as I say, that has a credit element in it, and that benefits us to the extent that you pay later. But when the rice is supplied to the Venezuelans, the credit, or the income associated, or the price associated with what the rice farmers receive now is where a big part of the problem arises. Because rice is supplied, and in return, a price is paid. But the final price that the farmer receives at the farm gate, as it were, or wherever it is, off the top come a number of services, starting with your fund, the social fund, which again, it need not be a bad idea, but how much you decide to apportion and how it is used matters. Because if you take $1 per bag for the social fund, and then the fund itself is not in the control or not used for the benefit of farmers or the agricultural community, you have a loss there to the farmers. And that is what is being pointed to here. I mean, one might argue over whether it should have been a little bit more, a little bit less, but the use of the fund is what matters.
Exactly.
Since there is no overall management in which the farmers themselves have an important say, this is part of the problem. Then there are a range of services. We've had this in the past. One of the reasons why the governments here on the PPP, even the colonial governments, got involved in rice marketing was because at that time, the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, millers would take rice from a farmer, take rice from farmers, provide them with services varying from fertilizer, machinery services, technical advice, and other things. And by the time they finish with you, the farmers are paying for a range of services and get not enough for the labor even that they provide in producing the rice. And we seem to have gone under this arrangement back to that situation, where by the time you take off all the services and the materials that are supplied, the farmers are dissatisfied with the price received for their labor and the inputs that they have put into the price, put into the rice. In other words, there's a question here of exploitation arising from the mechanism which the government has put in place for this transaction. This is really the bigger part of the problem as regards the farmer. Now, it causes now difficulties between the farmer, the millers, the timing with which the millers pay for the paddy, and if the miller, for example, has excessive costs because he's inefficient, it seems that we are in a situation where the farmers are not in a position to negotiate or move between millers. They end up having to finance the inefficiencies of the millers also. So those are the things that I wanted to emphasize. But I wanted, just to answer your question finally, any mechanism that puts money into the hands of a government provides scope for corruption. This is what I think you're asking me to address.
And related to the initial...
Yeah, there's a lot of money here. There's a lot of money. It's going to an entity, and the entity isn't really accountable to the public in general, more importantly, to the farming community and the rice farmers. NISIL, by the same token, is a publicly owned company. It may be registered under the Corporations Act, which is a private framework, private corporation framework, but it's entirely owned by the government. It's entirely funded by the state, its establishment, and if it makes losses, just as the entities under it make losses, its taxpayers have to fund it. In that sense, this is taxpayers' money. These are taxpayers' resources, insofar as the funds are concerned, and insofar as, of course, the sale of a product is involved, there are farmers' resources due to the farmers or to the millers, and there's a dispute here, if you like, an unhappiness over the way that it's managed. So the resources seem to be managed and assigned in a way where a whole set of other beneficiaries, either who would not normally be entitled to resources or who are getting excess resources. So the corruption doesn't only take the form of direct misappropriation, but of the overpricing of resources provided by other actors.
The on-the-hand deals.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but
Professor.
I thought a key resource mentioned by Dr. Durgan, and that is the freight.
Yes,
The
but
movement
these are
of
the
it.
things on the
That's the
top.
biggest,
Yeah.
that's the biggest source of the.
It is worse than the people think. Because of this deal and the money they could make of it, there's a whole new group of rice millers, people in the rice industry, brokers, and so forth. People who were not so long ago nobodies are now multi-gazillionaires.
In US dollars.
In US dollars. And And the whole thing is, when you look at it, it's about family, friends, and cronies. That is why I was so impressed and I was so amused this morning when a farmer said, Doc, have you seen the PDP list? And I said, no, what's happening? He said, Mama, Daddy, Pikni, everybody there on the list. It tells you the story.
The same set of beneficiaries.
The same
Yeah.
set of
So
beneficiaries.
it's a dynasty.
It's kind of a dynasty, and the farmers know that now. They now understand why their price is low, that this thing is screamed off by a small group of people. And then I have to tell you how farmers express themselves. And you want to cry if you hear it, but they say it so perfectly that everybody can hear it. Like in Essequibo, the guy with the placard, he's clearly said, he said, me rice business got plenty bog. Siraj, Jagnarain, Ramsami, and
PPP.
all of them live in one house called PPP. He said, 11th of May, we going to smoke them out. It tells you the frustration. It tells you the frustration.
Remember
these
the
people
lady who
have.
came up to us, she was crying when we were on a demonstration in the Essequibo?
Yeah, it's horrible.
She-
If
she-
I tell you what is happening on the ground today, some of the millers are just refusing to take more paddy because they say, I don't know what's going on. And let me pedal back. Last year, when the opposition and Mr. Granger broke the news that something is wrong in the rice industry, because while Ramsami is saying that it's all hunky-dory and perfect,
He was talking about booming price.
booming and
crop.
everything booming.
Record breaking.
When Mr. Granger said that, but this is not what I'm hearing from my people on the ground. So when he said that it is wrong, don't forget they tried the race thing again because they labeled it, Ramsami labeled it as voodoo mathematics. December, when they couldn't hold it anymore, then the president came out and he said, yeah, there's a problem. And the problem he's going to solve, but it was a small problem, but he gave $5.1 billion. Where it came from, we don't know. We suspect Caribe or wherever. And then we said, well, okay, the farmer's problem is solved. No, that money went again to cronies, friends, and so forth. You understand? So here are we, where they continue saying that, the rice industry did good. And I keep telling them that this is because there was a man with a vision called Hoyt who said that under the IMF agreement, let us privatize rice, sugar, and so forth. And he did it perfectly. Because while Ramsami is saying Durga or Alaisi got their mills free, the man is blatantly lying. Because the best mill was Burma with 2 brand new mills. President Hoyt said, no, that one stays to stabilize the price in the country. And there were many other mills sold to everywhere. So this guy Ramsami just blatantly lies. You understand? And for the viewers' information, when he thinks that I'm going to sue him here, I won't do that because I know that he's an American citizen, and in America they pay money when you do this kind of thing.
So you intend to sweep him out?
I'm telling him, yes, yeah, in America,
You will smoke
because
him out.
there we'll smoke him out. You understand? Not here. So the corruption is so embedded now with these people that I agree with those farmers. You have to smoke them out on the 11th of May.
What is concerning me, and what surprised me, is not until the price of oil fell so dramatically, and I was writing on it, that I became aware of the magnitude
And they didn't drop the price,
of
they didn't reduce the
corruption.
price.
No, well, the oil price fell in 6 months between mid 2014 and the other year. That's why I started to write those articles that brought you into contact with me over this.
Yes.
Yeah.
That the whole scheme was about to collapse, or still is about to collapse. That I became aware of this big festering source of issues related to corruption and big sets of money, lots of money, existing everything in Guyana, that I was not aware of, even though I pretty a lot in these things, having written and talked a lot about the narco state and all that. I never figured that this was such a monumental location of irregularity within the state of Guyana. So what I think we need to recognize that there may be other areas like this which we're not investigating until maybe some incident occurs.
to the crisis.
A crisis according
What
to
is,
them.
you gentlemen, you must have heard that the president issued a statement saying that in their manifesto, that he will set up a court to deal with corruption. What do you think about that, each of you?
Let me just remind you that prior to his accession to office, the current president denied
Yes,
that
yes.
corruption.
I remember that.
was
When he was
existing
General
in Ghana.
Secretary for the
That's
PPP,
correct. On
he
any
said,
significant
I have written
scale.
many things about that, and he keeps saying over and over again, where is the corruption? Bring the evidence.
But immediately before 20...
And when
before-
Ramkaran, remember Ralph Ramkaran claimed that he resigned as a result of them asking them to investigate this thing.
But immediately before the 2011 election, he was forced to admit by the press that there was corruption and that he would deal with it when he's elected, when he was
Well,
elected. He did admit that.
Right.
As a matter of fact, we had a little bit of a little bit of a contretemps in Parliament over this, because I was trying to quote for the members of Parliament the statement he made to that effect, and the Speaker disallowed it. But it doesn't deny the fact that he did say it, and it is recorded in the newspapers. The General Secretary of the party then announced, this is Mr. Rohini, that the party had set up a mechanism for investigating and disciplining members accused of corruption. And you will remember that prior to that, I can't remember which year, but I published something on it, Mrs. Jagan had announced the establishment of another committee, of which Roy was part, and which never reported once
To Parliament.
to anybody, as far as I'm aware, outside of the PPP, on what they had found. Although between the time of the establishment of that body, the time when Mrs. Jagan herself headed a body associated with corruption, and today, they have never reported a single investigation, a single finding, notwithstanding the fact that on a variety of fronts, fraud has been found involving all manner of persons in, near to, outside and around the PPP and the government.
How could you deal with this very glaring fact of NCN when those two fellows were found? Could you explain to the viewers?
Well, I don't know how you
Well,
can
there are other
explain.
things
A
other than that.
report-
Because
a
that's-
report was presented.
Yes, a report-
request-
Irrigation.
And
the
an
request
investigation
of the-
was carried out, but there's no report.
A report of I've seen a report of some sorts which the president sent to the leader of the opposition, but more importantly, no action whatsoever followed on that report. Prior to the report, there was a suspension and some other story, but in terms of disciplinary action and recouping or retrieving monies, nothing has happened. So these statements about acting against corruption are made for purposes of fooling the public. And as soon as they believe the public has forgotten, they continue as per normal.
Bishop Ethel calls it ice cream promises.
Well, there you have it.
May I make a remark here? Because there's a link between NCN and the rice industry.
Okay, tell us.
When we talk about Mr. Fozzie Sattar,
Who was the head of it? Who
who
used
was,
to be?
who used to be the head.
And was part of
Mr.
the corrupt practice.
Yeah, Mr. Fozzie Sattar, do you guys know that he was also in the rice board?
At
In
the same
Guyana,
time.
yes, at the Guyana Rice Development Board. So when he was taken out there, he was rewarded from NCN. Where was he rewarded? They put up a whole new company to put windmills in the
You mean now?
yeah. And who is the head of that organization with an American company so-called, but most probably the windmills will come out of China? Mr. Fozzie Sattar.
So he's there right now as the CEO of that company?
He's the CEO here locally of that
Right here.
company. The same Fozzie Sattar.
So that's how the PPP deals
That's
with
how
corruption.
the PPP deals with this thing.
Corruption.
They move their guys around, you know, they steal here or they
You
do
penalize
something
him by
there
moving into another company and perhaps with more money.
with more money.
Well,
Now US dollars.
Mr. Greenwich, I wanted to come back to this question because you were a parliamentarian, the shadow finance minister, and you more knowledgeable than us
But sure,
on the question of the accountability of Parliament. And I remember that you raised this issue. Maybe was it you had a legal case now where you challenged them about spending money, which the acting Chief Justice has ruled on. Could you explain a little bit about that?
well, there were several cases. If we start at the level of the Public Accounts Committee, there are several instances where one was not satisfied that monies properly approved by the Parliament were spent in accordance with the Appropriation Act. In other words, money was given for A and it wasn't approved. You had one instance in which the 2012-2013 budgets were approved after having been cut. And notwithstanding the fact that monies not approved for government to spend, monies were not approved by government to be spent, the government went ahead and spent the money anyway. The first set of cases, so-called budget cuts case, went to the Chief Justice, seeking the Chief Justice's intervention on the matter, an attempt to get him to declare that these expenditures were illegal. In that first set of cases, the Chief Justice ruled that the Parliament did not have the power to amend the monies approved because, according to his reading, it was the Minister of Finance who lays a request, and if the less than that request is to be available to the ministry, it has to have been requested, the lower amount has to be requested by the Minister of Finance. As I said elsewhere, we have a constitution that carries passages on, if you like, financial rectitude, those things. Our constitution is no different from anywhere else in the Caribbean except perhaps for Australia. And in no jurisdiction has any interpretation ever arisen, and the Chief Justice did not cite any case abroad within a similar jurisdiction that justified that interpretation. Anyway, since that case is still the subject of a challenge by our lawyers, and it hasn't been completed even in our jurisdiction, so that it could go, for example, to the Caribbean Court. Another case arose in which again, the government spending was challenged. In this particular case, in 2014, the Minister of Finance sought to get additional funds, and in the request for additional funds demonstrated that he had in fact spent monies that had not been approved. I don't want to go through all the complication of that, but this has to do with the abuse of the contingencies fund. And this Minister of Finance, as well as his predecessor, but this one in particular, has been identified by the Auditors General, not one, but the Auditors General, including the current one, as being a serial abuser of the contingencies fund. It's like a serial killer. Monies are not provided, or they are to be used in clearly defined circumstances, and he proceeds to use those funds. In this particular case, what happened is that the Parliament amended the amount as per the Chief Justice's decision. He says, well, the Parliament couldn't cut in the manner that it had cut the first time. It just didn't approve, which is what he said they could do. They could either approve or not approve, but they can't cut. But that is a more serious resort. If you ask for $1 million for something, and the Parliament reduces it by 200,000 on grounds that you didn't account for or you couldn't justify, that's one thing. But now the Chief Justice is saying, well, you can't cut, but you can refuse to approve. And that is what we did. Having refused to approve, the minister went and spent the money anyway. Went and spent the money anyway. And that, as it stands now, is a decision taken by the Chief Justice, and it is what it will reinforce the decision of the House to take the minister to the Privileges Committee for contempt of Parliament by way of deliberately, more than once, setting about to spend in defiance of a decision of the House, when he is supposed to be the manager of the consolidated fund. He has no powers other than to manage the fund. It does not give him the powers to decide whether or not monies can't or can be spent other than what is being approved by the Parliament. So that is the answer to your question. There are a number of cases here, and the Chief Justice, the courts have pronounced in a manner that's definitive, but there are still some elements that are still being challenged in the
Going to
courts.
go first and then take.
Yeah. Now, what Mr. Greenwich has said is a good example from how lawless things have become. Back to the rice industry and the Petro-Caribe Fund. This thing was meant to be a very good thing. And the farmers want to know that, can you rescue this thing? And as I said, that it is good for Guyana because we get an elevated price. That tells you that they are dead wrong on when they talk about world market prices. You need to talk about the rice index, and you have to position your rice. Venezuela is one of them. The Petro-Caribe Fund, if we can bring back sanity in it after May 11th,
You mean you have to vote them out?
no, the farmers say smoke them out.
Oh, smoke.
You understand? You don't want them to come back. You
Right.
understand? So if we can bring back sanity, if not all the money is stolen or disappeared through BVI companies and that sort of thing, you understand? There should be enough money to re-establish the agriculture bank. Today, you can finance a vehicle cheaper than to a production company.
But who closed the bank down?
The PPP closed down the bank. So we have to bring back the agriculture bank and Petro-Caribe. If you read the rules, that would be the agriculture bank would be a fantastic thing. We get the money at 1% interest. So in the agriculture bank, you can discuss with the government and the central bank, can we use that money and give it to farmers at 3 to 4%? Then you need to have what we call a shock absorber, which is the intervention.
Before you go
fund.
on to that, because it's crucial that you explain to the farmers that the new government, that the government that's in waiting, that is the APNU AFC, have already agreed to put in their manifesto that re-establishment of the bank, the agri-bank,
Well,
which will link
Yeah.
to the stabilization fund, which I know you want to talk about,
yeah.
and the changing of laws that will make the organization democratic.
Well, the AFC and the APNU, they are aware, and they have said that if there's one thing which is very important in the country is the rice industry. And to use many of my friends in the APNU, they said, buddy, they killed sugar already, let me rescue rice as quick as possible, because sugar is a more difficult task. So if we can quickly bring back sanity and not all the money is disappeared out of the Petro-Caribe Fund, we could then see how quickly we can liquidate the quantities, because all the big talk about the markets in Africa and in Iraq and in Iran
Panama.
and in Panama only pay them for a quarter of what they
Of
do.
the four, one shipment of the four shipments.
Yeah, so that gone down the drain, and then you have the whole Chile thing. Isn't it pathetic that when I opened a new market, to frustrate it and to make us look bad, they paid a Pakistani broker to send some bogus things here to show that there was stones and God knows what in it, while we have a GRDB certificate stating that foreign matters nil. And the quality was of superb quality. So this Leslie Ramsamy, you understand, first he bailed out, he was nowhere to be found, and suddenly he appears again, and then he spewed so much venom that it doesn't work. So the Petro-Caribe thing for rice and other products of Guyana is a good thing. It's a good thing if we can bring back sanity in it for the rice farmers. It might be the savior short term, immediately after May 11th. And if we can manage to get these corrupt people out, then we have a good future for rice.
All right, if you just joined us, you're looking at a special program called Rice for Life. We have been discussing the Petro-Caribe deal. We've been discussing all of the irregularities with that deal, and we have found that it's not a bad deal, but that there have been some holes created by the government that frustrate the system and have made paupers into millionaires and billionaires. We have on the panel former Minister of Finance, Mr. Clive, and former MP for the APNU. We have Dr. Dorga, and then we have Professor Clive Thomas, an authority on economics, and myself and Mr. Raham, and we are chairing this special discussion. We'll take a break and come back. Don't go away. Stay with us.
Transportation development. APNU AFC in government will consult on the construction of a deep water harbor located in the Demerara Essequibo area, since Demerara is still the hub of all import-export activity to and from the country. Fertilizer, imported food, drinks, and mechanical imports, even the outward shipment of sugar, rice, and other commodities will all become increasingly more economical with the development of a deep water harbor. The production potential of the Brazilian states of Roraima and the Amazonas, which totals 800,000 square miles, would create many jobs in Guyana if we are to assist them to transport their products through this country. Goods to and from Bovista and Manaus and the states of Roraima and the Amazonas can pass through Guyana on roads built by Guyana and Brazil to the ocean to the deep water harbor. The tolls to traverse our roads and use our seaports alone will earn significant revenue. Hinterland airstrips, major and key secondary roads to mining and forestry sites, Amerindian villages and other communities outside the main settlement areas will be upgraded to facilitate ease of communication, transportation, and access to Guyana's natural resources. APNU AFC will support a decentralized approach to road infrastructure development. APNU AFC in government will collaborate with municipalities to ensure that roads and bridges are effectively constructed and maintained. In the medium term, the option of another bridge across the Demerara River will be explored to meet growing demands and expansion in the Essequibo Islands, West Demerara, and the housing and agricultural sectors. APNU AFC is open to consideration of a premium public transportation system, which may be priced higher but offer a better quality of service with subsidies to senior citizens, school children, and the differently able. APNU AFC in government will facilitate the early completion of the IDB-supported initiative for the integration of the regional infrastructure of South America to interconnect South America economies through transportation, energy, and telecommunication links.
Vote APNU AFC.
All right, welcome back to Rice is Life. If you just joined us, we have this big discussion on the Petro-Caribe deal and other deals that seems to be having a problem with the development of Guyana. Professor Clive Thomas, all of us discussed before. I know that you have your thoughts together and you want to give a summary for the benefit of the viewers in terms of what was said just now, Professor.
Well, it is not so much a comment as to make two observations on what we've been discussing.
Yes.
First of all, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think the Petro-Caribbean deal, the likelihood of it being there over the next 5 years, I think is probably 1 in 10.
Wow, 1 in 10.
Yeah, first of all, it's been demonized by the political opposition in Venezuela. And I think that if they win the elections, or if Maduro has to leave for any other reason, they're going to abandon it. So I just want to put that note of caution out. The second thing is I believe that in talking about the corruption, just to highlight for people that the biggest slush fund, which we discussed before, is NISL. And I think that people should have an idea that recognize that this is so huge, like the petrochemical, that we tend to underestimate its significance. It invests about 1/5 of the total public investment in this country. It had billions and billions of dollars and on its control. It's, as Carl said, it's registered as a private company, but it's not subject to the rules of private regulation in the market. It's entirely a public company, in the sense that the government is the only shareholder in a company registered as a private sector company. As a result of that, they don't pay any money or any recognize at all the existence of the consolidated fund. And that is where, together with the petrochemical, I think the two biggest loci of corruption and illegal, transparent transactions takes place with the government.
Well, I think another big surprise in those persons who are in economics would have heard in the media that the president would appoint former President Brian Jagdeo to head this committee, this council on economics. Mr. Carl Greenwich, is that appointment good for Guyana?
That is a rhetorical question. You don't need me to say that it is not. Basically, the experience with these two very, very large funds within formal systems, as outlined by CY a minute ago, points to a regime that is steeped in illegality, contemptuous of mechanisms for oversight and overviewing. The NISL, for example, has on its board the Minister of Finance, Mr. Brasington, and one other, Dr. Luncheon, who was on there at one stage. So why I'm emphasizing that is that enormous amounts of money, which are the people's money, are controlled without any mechanism of accountability by individuals. Now, Dr. Ashley Singh worked closely with Mr. Jagdeo on setting up a lot of the systems that are part and parcel of this process of misappropriation of state resources. You will recall the case with Atlantic, the Dr. Ramroot's business, in which Mr. Jagdeo announced or criticized Yesu Prasad for suggesting that the privileges and benefits being given to Ramroot's company were illegal, improper. And within a few weeks, and without admitting that Yesu Prasad was right, they changed the law retroactively to allow them to continue to give the benefits to that company. I'm pointing out to you, therefore, that what Mr. Ramatar seems to be pointing to is an attempt to make tighter the mechanisms by which they control and misappropriate our resources. I am not aware that there is any legislation under which Mr. Jagdeo can currently supervise and oversee a national entity, whatever it's called, the council, in which all decisions and investments have to pass through. I'm not aware of the existence of such a body, and if it exists, as to what powers Mr. Jagdeo has or will have, or the chairman will have of that entity. But what I'm pointing to is a cause for concern, because these mechanisms for which no formal legislation exists, or which the legislation that exists is actually abused, by which the PPP siphons resources off and does not deposit them as required by the law into the consolidated fund. And every dollar they take and misuse in that way leaves farmers with less money to pay for their fertilizer, children's school fees, and other persons outside of the agricultural sector have now to do without resources that they would otherwise have had. I mean, when we pay taxes and the government misuses the taxes in this way, gives the money to their friends, it's our loss. It's not somebody else's money. It's not a case in which there's nobody hurt. It is we. When you look around and see how Panama is doing, or Brazil is doing, or Barbadian consumers are doing, the difference between us and them is largely the difference of where the government takes resources, does nonsense with it, so you don't get the benefit, as if those resources were properly spent by way of improved roads, lower costs of production, better services to our individuals, better health, improved education, and so forth. So the very thought that Mr. Jagger will be in a position to control and redirect most of our resources is rather an alarming one. And I don't think that the electorate would want to entertain that again, because all the major scams which we see, all the major mischanneling of resources were designed and put in place under the Jagdeo administration. All the major misappropriation of resources took place under him. They're continuing now, but they were set up prior to this current administration. This current administration seems to feel that their only mandate is to continue to abuse taxpayers' resources.
Well said, my dear Dr. Greenwich.
Well, added to what Mr. Gwynn just said, I would like to emphasize and point out to the public that the two major swords we've been discussing here tonight or today, NISL and the Petro-Caribe Fund, are both creatures of Dr. Yes. You know the type of Honorable Dr. Bart Jagger. They're really his handiwork.
And not to have him appointed as the chairman of this council.
Yeah, that's the irony of it all.
And, we are almost out of time, so I'm going to give Mr. Rahman his time to give his closing comments, and we're going to go to the program. So, Mr. Rahman.
Well, I think that having heard these gentlemen, experts in their various areas, I think the viewers, particularly the rice farmers who have been struggling to get better prices for their paddy and so on, I think this will further convince them of the need to change the government and to vote solidly for the coalition that comprises the APNU and the AFC. There is no other chance for the rice farmers to survive, because as we have said earlier, and Dr. Durga has emphasized in his contribution, that if the only this coalition, if it becomes the new government, will implement solutions, permanent solutions to the rice industry, and the farmers will forever live happily with their families and their relatives, and there will be no bickering anymore, and they will never be again in a state of panic, wondering what the prices will be.
Well said as well. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening on television, let me thank you all for viewing this program. Let me thank you as well for the opportunity of, staying the course with us, because this is a very important issue. You're going to be the one that will make the decision whether you want a better governance and more accountability for your hard-earned money. On behalf of all of us, Mr. Carl Greenwich, Dr. Durga, Professor Clive Thomas, and Mr. Rahman, we want to thank you for staying with us. We're going to see you back here again on another program of Rice is Life.